Freya Hollis woke up to the distinct feeling that she'd either died and gone to the worst possible afterlife, or she'd screwed up so monumentally that the universe itself had come to personally escort her to prison. Her eyelids felt like they'd been glued shut with industrial adhesive. Her mouth tasted like something had crawled in there, died, and then been resurrected just to die again out of spite. Every single muscle in her body screamed a symphony of absolute misery, and somewhere in the back of her skull, a marching band was rehearsing for what had to be the apocalypse. But none of that, absolutely none of it, explained why she could hear the sound of synchronized breathing outside her door. Freya cracked one eye open. White ceiling, sterile smell. Medical facility, then. That tracked with the full-body sensation of having been put through a meat grinder and reassembled by someone who'd lost the instruction manual halfway through. She turned her head. Mistake! Huge mistake! Her neck did not appreciate that, and squinted at the window set into her door. What she saw made her wonder if the painkillers they'd pumped into her had some seriously creative side effects. Standing outside her room, in perfect formation, was a line of soldiers. Not just any soldiers. These were the kind of military personnel who looked like they'd been chiseled from granite and fed a steady diet of nails and disappointment. Full combat gear. Weapons at ready. Standing so still they could have been statues, except for the barely perceptible rise and fall of their breathing. At attention. Outside her room. What in the actual? Freya croaked, her voice sounding like someone had taken sandpaper to her vocal cords. A medic materialized beside her bed so fast she nearly jumped out of her skin. Or would have, if her skin hadn't been held together by what felt like approximately 6,000 stitches and medical tape. "Lieutenant Hollis," the medic said, and his voice had that weird quality people got when they were talking to someone they weren't sure was supposed to be alive. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" "Like I got into a fistfight with a cargo hauler and lost," Freya managed. "Why is there a platoon outside my door? Did I commit a war crime? Because I'm pretty sure I'd remember committing a war crime." The medic, his name tag read Lorne, which was somehow both official and entirely unhelpful, did something with his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a grimace. "No war crimes, Lieutenant. They're standing guard." "Standing guard?" Freya repeated slowly, as if saying it slower would make it make sense. It didn't. Standing guard. Against what exactly? Rogue medical equipment? Aggressive Jell-O cups? Lorne did that face thing again. "It's complicated." "I've got time," Freya said, gesturing vaguely at her definitely not going anywhere body. "And also, a lot of questions, starting with, where am I? What happened? And why does my everything hurt? You're at Firebase Olympus, Medical Wing. You've been unconscious for 3 days. And as for why everything hurts..." Lorne pulled up a holo display that showed what Freya could only describe as a highlight reel of her body's greatest injuries. 2 cracked ribs, compound fracture in your left arm, severe lacerations across your back and shoulders, a concussion, and blood loss that should have killed you twice over. Freya stared at the display. Memories were starting to creep back in, fuzzy and disjointed like a film that had been cut up and reassembled in the wrong order. Ship. She'd been in her ship. Transport duty. Boring, routine, the kind of mission you could fly in your sleep. Except something had gone wrong. "The transport mission," she said slowly. "To the Oxari homeworld. We were taking diplomats for the trade negotiations." Lorne nodded, his expression carefully neutral, in a way that made Freya's instincts scream that something was very, very wrong. We got hit, Freya continued, fragments of memory slotting into place, like pieces of a puzzle she really didn't want to complete. Something came out of nowhere. Weapons fire. The ship. We went down. The Crexel, Lorne supplied quietly. They ambushed your convoy. Your ship crashed on the Oxari planet surface. You were the only survivor from your vessel. Freya felt her chest tighten. She'd had a co-pilot. Martinez. Young guy, fresh out of the academy, still excited about every mission like it was an adventure instead of a job. Martinez? She asked, even though she already knew the answer from Lorne's face. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. Freya closed her eyes, took a breath that hurt more than her ribs could account for, opened them again. There'd be time to process that later, when she wasn't in a medical bay with a platoon of soldiers outside her door, for reasons no one wanted to explain. After the crash, she pressed. What happened after the crash? Lorne glanced at the door, then back at her. Commander Tolk wants to be the one to brief you on that. He's on his way. That's the second time someone's avoided answering my questions, Freya said. And I'm starting to get the feeling I did something either spectacularly heroic or spectacularly stupid. Given my track record, I'm betting on stupid. As if summoned by the accusation, the door to her room slid open with a hiss that made her headache spike. The soldiers outside snapped to even more rigid attention, which Freya hadn't thought was physically possible. Commander Tolk walked in, and Freya had to resist the urge to salute from her prone position. Tolk was the kind of officer who looked like he'd been military in a past life, current life, and probably his next 3 reincarnations. Broad-shouldered, steel-haired, with a face that had forgotten how to smile sometime around the turn of the century. He stopped at the foot of her bed and just stared at her. Not with anger, not with disappointment, with something that looked unsettlingly like awe. Lieutenant Hollis, he said finally, his voice like gravel being mixed in a cement truck. You have caused, quite possibly, the largest diplomatic incident in human-Oxari relations. Sir, Freya said weakly, I was unconscious for 3 days. I don't think I can be held responsible for— You saved their cubs, Tolk interrupted, and his tone made it clear this wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact that had apparently rewritten several chapters of interstellar politics. Freya blinked. Cubs. The word triggered something in her memory. Small shapes in the darkness. Crying. Trapped. Oh no. After your ship crashed, Tolk continued, seeing the recognition dawn on her face. You somehow managed to extract yourself from the wreckage. You were injured. Badly injured. But mobile. You should have activated your emergency beacon and waited for extraction. But I didn't, Freya said slowly, more memories filtering back through the haze. No, Tolk agreed. You didn't. Instead, you stumbled into an Oxari settlement that was under attack by Crexel forces, and in that settlement, you found a group of Oxari cubs trapped in a collapsed shelter. Freya remembered now. The sounds of weapons fire in the distance, the settlement burning. And those cubs, massive even as children, covered in fur, with eyes too big and terrified in a way that transcended species. 3 of them, trapped under rubble, crying for their parents. I couldn't just leave them, Freya said, and it came out almost defensive. No, Tolk said, and there was something complicated in his expression. You couldn't. So instead, you spent, according to the Oxari military reports, approximately 2 hours digging them out by hand. Then, when Crexel forces started closing in on your position, you rigged your emergency beacon to create a false distress signal that led them away from the cubs. That part's a bit fuzzy, Freya admitted. Then, Tolk continued like she hadn't spoken, you stayed with those cubs, defended them for nearly 6 hours against multiple Crexel incursions, using nothing but a sidearm, debris from your crash, and what the Oxari are now calling suicidal human tenacity. It wasn't suicidal, Freya protested. It was just, they were kids. What was I supposed to do? Tolk's expression did something complicated. Most people, Lieutenant, would have hidden, waited for rescue, prioritized their own survival. They were kids, Freya repeated, as if that explained everything. In her mind, it did. Oxari cubs, Tolk said carefully, are considered sacred in their culture. Protecting another family's cubs is their highest honor, higher than any military achievement, higher than any political office. It's the foundation of their entire civilization. Freya felt a sinking sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with her injuries. Commander, why are there soldiers outside my door? Because, Tolk said, with the air of someone delivering news he still didn't quite believe. The 3 cubs you saved have declared you their guardian heart, and they're not the only ones who want to ensure your safety. Guardian heart? It doesn't translate well. Closest equivalent would be sacred protector, honored guardian, the one who stands between death and children. That's a lot of words for I didn't let kids die, Freya said weakly. To the Oxari, Tolk said, it's everything. Those cubs? One of them is the daughter of planetary governor Herm. Another is the son of their chief military commander. You didn't just save random children, Lieutenant. You saved the future leadership of their planet. Freya let her head fall back against the pillow. So the soldiers outside are making sure nothing happens to you before the Oxari can formally honor you, which they're insisting on doing, with their highest military decoration, which has never been awarded to a non-Oxari in their entire history. I just wanted to fly cargo routes, Freya said to the ceiling. Nice, boring cargo routes. Maybe transport some mining equipment, possibly some frozen vegetables. Not cause diplomatic incidents. Too late for that, Tolk said. And was that almost amusement in his voice? The Oxari delegation is arriving within the hour. Human command is scrambling, and the cubs themselves have been camped outside this facility since they found out you were here. The cubs, Freya repeated faintly. All 3 of them. They've refused to leave. They've adopted human military protocol and declared themselves your honor guard. Lieutenant Hollis, you have 3 Oxari children, each already the size of a grown human, and approximately as movable as a mountain, who have decided their sacred duty is to protect you. Freya closed her eyes. I think I need more painkillers. I think, Tolk said, you need to prepare for the strangest debriefing of your military career. Over the next hour, as Lorne poked and prodded and ran scans that made interesting beeping noises, Freya's memories stopped being polite fragments and started becoming a full-blown assault of sensory overload. She remembered the impact. Not just remembered. Felt it again, the way her entire body had slammed forward against the restraints. The horrible screaming of metal tearing itself apart. The sudden silence after the ship finally stopped moving. And she realized she was somehow still breathing. Martinez hadn't been breathing. Freya shoved that thought into a box and locked it. Later. She'd deal with that later. She remembered crawling out of the wreckage, her arm bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Blood running down her face and into her eyes. The emergency kit had been partially intact. She'd grabbed it on instinct, military training overriding the part of her brain that was screaming about lying down and waiting for the inevitable. The Oxari settlement had been maybe half a kilometer from the crash site. She'd heard the weapons fire first, then the screaming. Not human screaming, Oxari screaming, which was somehow worse because it was deeper, more resonant. The kind of sound that bypassed your ears and went straight into your bones. "You were disoriented," Lorne said, checking her pupil response with a light that felt like it was drilling into her brain. "Concussed. Blood loss. Most people in that state can barely walk in a straight line." "I'm very motivated by not dying," Freya muttered. What she didn't say was that she'd been motivated by something else, too. The settlement had been small, residential, and Crexel forces didn't distinguish between military and civilian targets. They were raiders, scavengers, the kind of species that measured success in body counts and stolen resources. Freya had stumbled into the settlement expecting to find a place to hide. Maybe scavenge supplies. Definitely activate her beacon, where the signal wouldn't be blocked by the crash debris. Instead, she'd found carnage. Buildings collapsed, fires burning, bodies, Oxari civilians, massive and furry and very, very dead. The Crexel had hit fast and brutal, the way they always did. And in the middle of all that destruction, she'd heard it. A sound that cut through the concussion and the pain and the overwhelming urge to just sit down and give up. Crying. Not adult crying, child crying, cubs crying. "I followed the sound," Freya said aloud, the memories coming faster now. "There was a building, half collapsed, residential structure. I could hear them inside." Tolk, who'd been standing silently by the window, turned. The shelter had taken a direct hit. Support beams collapsed. According to the Oxari reports, it should have been completely inaccessible. "It nearly was," Freya said. "But there was a gap, small enough that I could get through." Barely. She remembered squeezing through debris, ignoring the way sharp edges tore at her already injured body. Remembered the darkness inside, lit only by small fires. And remembered the 3 cubs huddled in the corner, covered in dust, eyes wide with terror. Oxari cubs weren't small. Even at what Freya later learned was roughly 5 years old in human terms, they were already the size of adult humans. Covered in thick fur that ranged from deep brown to almost black. They had the same broad shoulders and powerful builds as their adult counterparts, just smaller, with bigger eyes, and voices that cracked with fear. "Hello," Freya had said stupidly, because what else do you say to terrified alien children when you're bleeding out and the world is ending outside? The cubs had stared at her. One of them, the smallest, with fur that was almost russet in the firelight, had made a sound that was half growl, half whimper. "It's okay," Freya had said, which was possibly the biggest lie she'd ever told. "I'm going to get you out of here." "You spent 2 hours moving debris," Tolk said, pulling Freya back to the present. "Oxari engineers later examined the site. They said what you did should have been structurally impossible. The weight alone—" "Adrenaline is a hell of a drug," Freya interrupted. "Also, spite. Never underestimate spite." What she remembered most wasn't the pain or the effort. It was the way the cubs had watched her. Silent after that first sound. Just watching this strange, small, bleeding creature tear at the rubble with hands that were absolutely not designed for that kind of work. When she'd finally cleared enough space for them to squeeze through, they'd followed her without question. 3 massive children, trusting this dying alien to lead them to safety. "That's when the Crexel found you?" Lorne said quietly. Freya nodded. "I heard them coming. Clicking sounds. They communicate in clicks and whistles, the Crexel. Sounds harmless until you know what it means. What it meant was hunting party. What it meant was they'd detected movement. What it meant was 3 cubs and 1 half-dead human were about to become very easy targets. "My emergency beacon," Freya said. "Military grade. Powerful transmitter. I'd been about to activate it, call for help." "But you didn't," Tolk said. "I did," Freya corrected. "Just not the way I was supposed to. I rigged it to broadcast a false distress signal. Made it sound like there were human survivors in the opposite direction. Kxle hate humans. We're too unpredictable, too aggressive for their taste, but they also know human ships carry valuable tech." "You used yourself as bait," Tolk said flatly. "I used my beacon as bait," Freya corrected. "Then I took the cubs and we ran. Found a defensive position in a collapsed transport station about 200 meters away. Good sight lines, choke points, only a few ways in." What she didn't mention was that she'd been fading fast by that point. Blood loss, pain, exhaustion, all of it catching up with her. She'd collapsed against a wall, and the cubs had clustered around her, silent and watching. The smallest one, the one with russet fur, had gently touched her injured arm. Not pulling, not poking. Just acknowledging the injury with a gentleness that made Freya want to cry. "I'm okay," Freya had lied again. "We just need to wait. Help will come." Except help was hours away. And the Crexel, after finding the beacon and realizing the trick, had come back angry. Freya remembered the first attack. 3 Crexel scouts, clicking and hissing their rage. They'd come through the east entrance, and Freya had been ready with her sidearm. Not her preferred weapon. She was a pilot, not ground infantry, but she knew which end the bullets came out of. She'd killed the first one with a shot that was more luck than skill. The second had made it within 3 meters before she'd dropped it. The third had retreated, but Freya knew it wouldn't be for long. "They kept coming," Freya said softly. "Wave after wave. Not big attacks. They're not stupid. Just testing, probing, trying to find a weakness." She'd used everything. Debris as traps, her jacket as a decoy. At one point, she'd used her helmet as a projectile, throwing it to distract a Crexel long enough to get a clean shot. The cubs had stayed behind her the whole time, completely silent. And that silence had been worse than screaming, because Freya knew what it meant. They were waiting for her to fail, waiting for the moment when she couldn't protect them anymore. "I wasn't going to let that happen," Freya said, more to herself than to Tolk or Lorne. They were kids, just kids. And I was the only thing standing between them and... She didn't finish. "You held that position for 6 hours, Tolk said. Killed or disabled 11 Crexel warriors, with a standard sidearm and no backup." "I ran out of ammunition after the 4th hour, Freya admitted. "Had to get creative." Creative had meant using Crexel weapons, meant using debris as weapons, meant using her own blood. She'd been bleeding enough to create false trails and confuse their tracking. It had meant doing things she'd never been trained for, driven by pure, stubborn human refusal to die when cubs were counting on her. When the Oxari military had finally arrived, alerted by the real distress signal that Freya had barely managed to activate when she'd thought the Crexel were finally going to overwhelm her position, they'd found her unconscious, bled out, technically dead by Oxari medical standards, and they'd found 3 cubs, completely unharmed, clustered around her body like they were trying to protect her the way she'd protected them. "That's when things got complicated," Tolk said dryly. Freya laughed, which hurt. "You mean they weren't already complicated?" "Just wait," Tolk said. "It gets worse." Worse how? Freya asked, though part of her really didn't want to know. Tolk pulled up a chair, which seemed ominous, because Tolk never sat down during briefings unless the news was catastrophically bad, and folded his hands in a way that suggested he was trying to figure out where to even start. "Do you know anything about Oxari culture?" he asked finally. "They're big. They're strong. They value honor and combat prowess," Freya recited from the basic xenocultural training all pilots received. "They have a clan-based society with strong family units. They're generally friendly to humans, but maintain strict territorial boundaries. And they really, really don't like the Crexel." "All accurate," Tolk agreed. "But you're missing the most important part. The foundation of their entire civilization revolves around one central principle: the protection of cubs. Not just your own cubs, any cubs, all cubs. In Oxari culture, a cub represents the absolute future of their species. Harming a cub is punishable by permanent exile or death. Allowing a cub to come to harm through negligence can destroy entire families socially." "Okay," Freya said slowly. "So they take child care seriously." "It's not child care," Tolk said with the patience of someone explaining quantum physics to a particularly slow rock. "It's sacred duty, and protecting someone else's cubs, especially at great personal risk, is considered the single highest honor an Oxari can achieve. Higher than military glory, higher than political power. It's the act that defines their entire moral framework." Freya felt the sinking sensation in her stomach get significantly worse. "And I protected 3 of them." "You protected 3 of them while being a different species, while critically injured, and while having absolutely no cultural obligation to do so," Tolk corrected. "From the Oxari perspective, you embodied their highest ideal. You became, essentially, the physical manifestation of everything they value most." "That sounds like a lot of pressure for just doing the right thing," Freya muttered. "The cubs you saved," Tolk continued, ignoring her discomfort, "are named Maki, Polth, and Jin. Maki is the daughter of planetary governor Herm, the single most powerful political figure on this world. Polth is the son of their chief military commander, and Jin is the niece of their high religious leader." Freya stared at him. "You're telling me I accidentally saved the 3 most politically important children on the entire planet?" "Accidentally is the operative word," Tolk agreed. "You had no way of knowing who they were, which, from the Oxari perspective, makes it even more significant. You didn't save them for political gain. You saved them because they were cubs. Period." "So what happens now?" Freya asked. "They thank me. I say it was nothing. We all move on with our lives?" Tolk made a sound that might have been a laugh if he'd remembered how. "Not even close. The cubs have invoked an ancient rite called Guardian Heart. It's complicated to explain, but essentially, they've claimed you as their sacred protector. In Oxari culture, this creates a bond that supersedes almost everything else." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means," a new voice said from the doorway, "that those cubs will literally fight anyone who tries to harm you, including members of their own species." Freya turned her head. Still a mistake, her neck had opinions about movement, and found herself looking at a woman in diplomatic attire who had the particular expression of someone dealing with a situation so far outside her job description that she'd stopped caring about protocol. "Lieutenant Hollis, this is Kath, our chief xenocultural liaison," Tolk said. "She's been managing the diplomatic fallout." "Managing is a generous word," Kath said, walking into the room with the energy of someone who'd been running on coffee and spite for 3 days straight. "What I've been doing is standing between 2 civilizations who are both losing their minds in completely different ways. "Explain," Tolk ordered. Kath pulled up a holographic display that showed what looked like an organizational chart having a nervous breakdown. The Oxari government wants to award Lieutenant Hollis the Mark of the First Shield. It's their highest military honor, never awarded to a non-Oxari, ever. Giving it to a human is unprecedented and has sparked approximately 6 different political factions into heated debate about tradition versus evolution of cultural values. "Fun," Freya said weakly. "Meanwhile," Kath continued, "human command is panicking because they don't know how to handle this. Accept the honor, and we're potentially inserting ourselves too deeply into Oxari internal politics. Refuse it, and we insult their entire culture. Both options have significant diplomatic ramifications." "What do I want?" Freya asked. Both Tolk and Kath looked at her like she'd asked what color the sky was. "What you want is unfortunately not the driving factor here," Kath said gently. "The Cubs want you honored. The Oxari government wants you honored. Refusing would be seen as rejecting their highest cultural values. So I'm being forced to accept a medal." "You're being forced to accept a cultural adoption," Kath corrected. "The Mark of the First Shield isn't just a medal. It comes with legal rights across all Oxari territory. It means you're considered an honorary member of their species for legal and cultural purposes. It means Oxari will treat you with the same respect they'd give their own military heroes. And it means, this is the big one, you're now considered extended family to every cub you saved." Freya felt her brain trying to process that, and failing. "Extended family?" "The Cubs have declared you their guardian heart," Kath said. "That's a permanent bond. They will consider you family for the rest of their lives. And given that Oxari live approximately twice as long as humans, that's a significant commitment." "I didn't ask for any of this," Freya said, hearing the exhaustion in her own voice. "No one who earns the Mark of the First Shield asks for it," Tolk said quietly. "That's what makes it meaningful." A sound from outside the room made everyone turn. It was a low rumble, almost like thunder, but rhythmic, purposeful. "That would be the Cubs," Kath said with resignation. "They've been doing that every few hours. It's a protective vocalization. They're letting everyone know you're under their protection." "Can I see them?" Freya asked, surprising herself. Tolk and Kath exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" Tolk asked. "They're intense." "They're kids who watched me bleed for 6 hours," Freya said. "I think I owe them a hello." Lorne checked her vitals one more time, muttered something about inadvisable decisions, and helped prop her up in bed. Tolk moved to the door, spoke briefly with someone outside, and then stepped back. 3 shapes filled the doorway, and Freya was reminded all over again that Oxari cubs were not small. Maki entered first. She was the smallest of the 3, with russet brown fur that caught the light. Her eyes, large and dark and so expressive it hurt, locked onto Freya with an intensity that would have been terrifying if Freya hadn't seen that same face crying in the darkness. Polth came next, broader and darker-furred, moving with the careful control of someone trying very hard not to break anything. His gaze swept the room, checking corners and exits with the instinct of someone much older. Jin brought up the rear, slightly taller than the others, with fur that was almost black. She had a calm presence that reminded Freya of medics under fire, controlled, focused, ready. All 3 of them wore what looked like modified human military gear. Someone had clearly tried to outfit them with proper uniforms, and the result was both adorable and slightly absurd. They stopped at the foot of her bed, standing at attention with a precision that suggested they'd been practicing. "Hello," Freya said, her voice rougher than she'd intended. Maki made a sound, a low rumble that came from deep in her chest. Not threatening. Almost relieved. "Guardian Heart," Polth said in heavily accented but clear human standard. "You live." "I live," Freya confirmed, feeling absurdly emotional about the whole thing. "Thanks to the Oxari military, I hear." "You saved us first," Jin said quietly. Her voice was deeper than the others, more resonant. "You died for us." "I didn't die," Freya pointed out. "Just got really close." "You stopped breathing," Maki said, and her voice cracked. "We saw. You stopped, and we thought. "Hey," Freya said softly. "I'm okay. See? Still breathing. Still here." Polth took a step forward, then stopped, clearly uncertain. "We want to honor you. Our parents, our leaders, they all want to honor you. But humans say you might not accept. Why? How did you explain to alien children that you didn't feel like a hero? That you'd just done what anyone should do? And the idea of being celebrated for basic decency made you uncomfortable?" "It's not that I don't appreciate it," Freya said carefully. "It's that I don't feel like I did anything special. You were cubs in danger. I just did what needed doing." The three cubs exchanged glances, communicating in ways Freya couldn't follow. Then Jin spoke. "That is why you must be honored," she said. "You did not think. You did not calculate advantage. You saw cubs, and you protected. This is the truest form of guardian heart. This is what our stories tell of, what our history reveres. You are what we aspire to be." Freya felt something in her chest tighten. "I'm just a pilot. I fly ships. I'm not special." "You are guardian heart," Maki said firmly, with all the conviction of a child who'd made up their mind and wasn't going to be swayed. "You are ours. We claimed you. No one can unclaim." "Our parents want to give you the mark," Polth added. "It is our highest honor. You must accept. Please." And there it was, not a political demand, not a cultural obligation, just three kids who'd watched someone bleed for them, asking that person to accept recognition. Freya looked at Tolk, who had the decency to look sympathetic. Looked at Kath, who gave the smallest shrug. Looked back at the three massive furry children who were watching her with hope and determination. "Okay," Freya said quietly. "I'll accept. But only if you three stop standing guard outside my room like I'm going to vanish. You need rest, too." The cubs made synchronized sounds of protest, but Freya held up her uninjured hand. "I'm serious. Part of accepting your honor means I get to be worried about you, too. That's how this works, right? Guardian heart goes both ways?" The cubs looked at each other again. Then, slowly, all three of them made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a rumble. Agreement, Freya realized. Affection. "We will rest," Jin said. "But we will return. You are ours, and we are yours. This is the bond." "This is the bond," Maki and Polth echoed. Freya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Okay, it's a deal." The cubs filed out, moving with surprising quiet for their size. Tolk closed the door behind them and turned back to Freya. "The ceremony is tomorrow," he said. "Think you can stand?" With enough painkillers and spite, Freya managed a weak smile. "Absolutely." "Good," Tolk said, "because this is about to become the most watched diplomatic event in recent human Uxari history." "No pressure," Freya muttered. "None at all," Tolk agreed, in a tone that meant all the pressure in the galaxy. They wheeled Freya out the next morning, because her legs had opinions about standing, and those opinions were uniformly negative. Someone had found her a dress uniform that fit, barely, and managed to make her look slightly less like a corpse and more like a soldier who'd merely had a very bad week. Lorne had performed what he called creative medical engineering, which translated to enough painkillers to keep her conscious, but not so many that she'd start hallucinating during the ceremony. The gathering space was massive, had to be, to accommodate Oxari. They weren't a small species under the best circumstances, and when you packed several hundred of them into one area, along with human military personnel and various diplomatic staff, the result was controlled chaos with excellent acoustics. Freya's wheelchair stopped at the edge of a raised platform. The three cubs materialized beside her immediately. Apparently, their version of resting meant standing exactly 12 feet away at all times, and positioned themselves like the world's most intimidating honor guard. "You doing okay?" Polth asked quietly, leaning down. "Living the dream," Freya said, which was technically true if your dreams involved being the center of attention, while feeling like you'd been hit by a meteor. Governor Herm stood at the center of the platform. He was massive, even by Oxari's standards, with fur that was graying at the edges and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of a parent who'd nearly lost a child. When he saw Freya being wheeled forward, something in his expression cracked. He descended from the platform, each step deliberate, measured, and approached until he stood directly in front of her wheelchair. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. A planetary governor, on one knee, in front of her. The entire gathering space went silent. "Guardian Heart Freya," Herm said, his voice carrying across the space with the resonance of someone used to being heard. "You saved my daughter. You saved our future. There are no words in any language that adequately express what this means." Freya started, but Herm held up one massive hand. "You just did what any being should do. Yes," he said, and there was something almost like humor in his voice. "This is what Maki tells me you said. This is what makes you worthy. You saw cubs in danger, and your immediate response was to protect. No hesitation, no calculation. Pure instinct to defend those who could not defend themselves." He reached into his formal robes and pulled out something that gleamed in the light. It was a medallion, heavy and ornate, suspended on a thick chain. The design was complex, overlapping shields forming a protective circle, with what looked like small handprints in the center. "The mark of the first shield," Herm continued, "has been awarded exactly 18 times in our recorded history. Each recipient gave their life protecting cubs. You are the 19th, and you are the first to survive." That information hit Freya like a physical blow. "I'm sorry? The first to survive?" "The mark is awarded posthumously," Kath whispered from somewhere behind her. "You broke their entire award system by not dying." "Overachiever," Freya muttered. Herm's expression shifted. Oxari didn't smile the way humans did, but there was warmth there. "You also," he said, "are the first non-Oxari, the first guardian heart claimed across species. This honor comes with responsibilities and rights. You will be considered family to all Oxari. Our territories are your territories. Our protections extend to you. And these cubs," he gestured to Maki, Polth, and Jin, "are now bound to you as you are bound to them." "For how long?" Freya asked. "For life," Herm said simply. "Theirs and yours. This is the bond of Guardian Heart. It does not break." Freya looked at the three cubs. Maki was crying, silent tears running down her fur. Polth stood rigid, clearly fighting his own emotions. Jin met her gaze and nodded once, firm and certain. "Okay," Freya said, because what else could she say? "I accept." Herm rose and carefully placed the medallion around her neck. It was heavy, heavier than she'd expected, and warm from his hands. The moment it settled against her chest, every Oxari in the room made a sound. A rumble that started low and built, resonant and powerful, vibrating through Freya's bones. It was approval, honor, welcome. Then the human delegation did something Freya hadn't expected. They saluted. Every single human soldier, officer, and diplomat snapped to attention and saluted her. Tolk stepped forward. "Lieutenant Freya Hollis, by order of Human Military Command, and in recognition of exceptional valor in the protection of Allied civilians under combat conditions, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Captain." "You're kidding," Freya said faintly. "I never kid about paperwork," Tolk replied. "You'll also be receiving the Star of Valor, the Humanitarian Service Medal, and probably 36 other awards once the bureaucracy catches up with current events." "I don't want awards," Freya said, louder than she'd intended. "I didn't do this for glory or recognition or—" "We know," Herm interrupted gently. "That is precisely why you deserve them." The ceremony should have ended there. Protocol-dictated speeches, formal acknowledgments, probably some kind of reception with food Freya couldn't eat, and conversations she didn't want to have. Instead, a human officer, someone Freya didn't recognize, wearing medals that suggested he spent more time at desks than in ships, stepped forward with a smile that made her instincts scream. "This is wonderful," he said, his voice carrying that particular politician quality that made every word sound rehearsed. "Captain Hollis, your story is exactly what we need. A human hero, protecting alien children, bridging our species. We'd like to feature you in our next recruitment campaign. Show the galaxy what humanity stands for." The room went very, very quiet. Freya felt something cold settle in her chest. "No." The officer's smile didn't waver. "I understand you're overwhelmed, but this is an opportunity to—" "I said no." Freya's voice was flat. "You want to use what happened. Use those cubs, use Martinez's death, use all of it. For propaganda?" "Not propaganda," the officer said smoothly. "Inspiration. Your actions represent the best of—" "My actions," Freya interrupted, "represent doing the bare minimum. I saw kids who needed help, and I helped them. That's it. That's the whole story. There's no glory here, no recruitment message, just a pilot who couldn't walk away from cubs who were crying." She looked out at the gathered crowd, humans and Oxari both. "You want to honor what happened? Then stop making it about politics, or recruitment, or diplomatic advantage. I didn't save those cubs because they were Oxari, or because it would look good for humanity. I saved them because they were children. Period. And if that's not something every being in this room would do, human, Oxari, doesn't matter, then we're all failing at something fundamental." The silence stretched. Then Maki stepped forward and placed one massive hand on Freya's shoulder. "Guardian Heart speaks truth," she said clearly. "This is why we claimed her. Not because she is human, because she saw cubs and protected. This is the only thing that matters." Polth and Jin moved to flank her wheelchair. 3 cubs, creating a physical barrier between Freya and the humans who wanted to use her story. Herm made a sound that might have been approval, or amusement, or both. "My daughter is wise. This ceremony is concluded. Guardian Heart Freya needs rest, and we need to stop treating sacred bonds like political opportunities." The crowd began to disperse, but Freya caught the expressions. Some humans looked embarrassed, others thoughtful. The Oxari looked satisfied, like she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. Tolk appeared beside her wheelchair. You just told off a 2-star general in front of 2 species worth of witnesses. He deserved it, Freya said. Absolutely he did, Tolk agreed. You're going to be a nightmare to command. Looking forward to it, sir. They wheeled her back toward the medical facility, the cubs following like shadows. Halfway there, Jin spoke up. Guardian Heart Freya? Just Freya is fine. Freya, Jin corrected carefully. We have gifts. For your ship. For when you return to flying. You don't need to. We want to, Maki interrupted. Please, it is tradition. Guardian receives gifts from cubs. When they finally got her back to her room, the gifts turned out to be 3 things. A massive Oxari blade that Freya absolutely could not lift, a navigation star chart hand-carved into metal, and a small hologram projector that showed images of the 3 cubs. So you remember us, Polth said quietly, when you are flying far away. Freya looked at the 3 of them, these massive, fierce, gentle children who'd decided she was theirs. I don't think I could forget you if I tried. Good, Maki said firmly, because we are not forgetting you either. You are Guardian Heart. You are ours. Forever. Forever, Jin echoed. Forever, Polth agreed. Freya touched the medallion at her chest. Heavy, warm, real. Forever, she said finally. I can work with that. 6 weeks later, cleared for duty, and still getting used to her new rank, Freya walked onto her new ship, bigger than her old transport, with actual weapon systems and a crew of 5. She'd placed the hologram projector on her console, the star chart above her bunk, the blade she'd mounted on the wall, because what else do you do with a ceremonial weapon you can't lift? She was running pre-flight checks when her communication system chimed. Incoming message, Oxari origin. Freya opened it, and Maki's face filled the screen. Guardian Heart, you are flying again. I am, Freya confirmed. Miss me already? Always, Maki said seriously. Then she grinned, all teeth, slightly terrifying. Also, I am coming with you. Freya blinked. What? Cultural exchange program, Maki said cheerfully. I am assigned to your ship for 6 months. Polth and Jin are jealous. I win. Freya looked at the grinning cub on her screen, then at her new ship, then back at the screen. Of course you are, she said finally. Why would my life ever be simple? Simple is boring, Maki declared. We are Guardian Heart and Cub. We have adventures now. Freya started laughing. Couldn't help it. Her ribs still hurt, her arm was still healing, and she now had an Oxari teenager as a crew member. Adventures, she repeated. Sure, why not? She fired up the engines, filed her flight plan, and took off into a galaxy that had gotten significantly more complicated in the past 2 months. Behind her, the medallion swayed gently with the ship's movement, the mark of the first shield. She still didn't think she deserved it, but she was starting to understand that maybe that was exactly the point.